Hello everyone, welcome to this interview with Felipe Pepe, who agreed to do this despite the fact that it's very late in Japan right now, so that it can be daytime in France, where I am, as you can tell by my accent. Hello Felipe.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, you're not too tired, it's alright.
Yeah, don't worry. It's Monday, but I can handle it.
Good. Okay, so Felipe, you are Brazilian and you are living currently in Japan, and you are one of the world's experts on computer role playing games, CRPGs. And the
Yeah,
reason.
not sure I'm one of the biggest experts, but yeah,
Uh, yeah, but
I edited the book, yeah.
I'm the one that says it, so it's alright.
Okay, so if it's wrong, it's your fault.
Exactly. Yeah. No. The reason I can confidently say that is that you have spent years making the CRPG book, which is a collaborative effort to document and review basically every computer role playing game ever. But you're gonna tell me if that's right. Right
Not
now.
really. Like the book as a whole has like, let's say about 400. And for sure we have at least like 2000 of them in total. So
Wow.
it's a tiny little part, but we try to get the most important ones.
Yeah. Maybe for the second book then. We'll get the rest. So yeah, it's a huge book slash free PDF with hundreds of games reviewed by contributors from all over the world. Quick disclaimer: I wrote some reviews myself. So yeah, why was it important for you to do this project?
I think it was important because we didn't have something like this, you know. What we had before was the book Dungeons and Desktops by Matt Barton, which is like really important. Like it was basically the work that inspired me to do this.
Yeah.
But by the time I started doing this project, it was already very old. I think it was already like 7, 8 years old, and it didn't have any images. And I it was it was very good like in telling the story, like the overall story of how the genre evolved. But I wanted to show the image, like I wanted the idea was always to have something like a talk between friends, when you
Mm.
recommend a game to someone and you show a screenshot and something like this. That was the whole purpose. And the way it began was as a list at the RPG Codex. We were doing like a ranking, like the top 50 best RPGs ever.
Mm.
And it was like a really good list that not only we rank the games, but then we ask each person to write like a description of each game. Like let's say uh, Gothic is, let's say, top 5. Why is Gothic a good game?
Mm.
And then you have like each game like a little screenshot and an explanation of why you should play that game.
Yeah, it's an amazing list. I've read it many times. But there's a second one, right?
Yeah, we did two of them. Like the first one was about like 70 games. And it was like when we began the book project, like I think in 2012 or 13, more or less. And then later we updated it after you got a bunch of games like Pillars of Eternity
Mm.
and Wasteland 2 and everything. We did a second version with 100 games.
Yeah, because the first was 50 games, right? So you realized
It
that.
was supposed to be 50, but it was 72 because we just wanted to
Okay.
put a few extra.
So
I try to, let's say, to reach a bunch of different people. So the idea is this book, let's say, if you're a really hardcore RPG fan, there will be something cool for you because there will be like games that you never heard about, very obscure stuff. But also, if you never played any of the old games, let's say, if you began playing with Mass Effect or like, I don't know, Fallout 3 or something like this, I know you are never going to, let's say, boot up Ultima 1 or like a Calabath on the Apple II emulator. So I wanted to have stories from people who played those games at the time, telling how it was.
yeah.
So if you look at the first, let's say, decade of reviews from the 80s, I focused very hard on getting people who played them at the time of release. So
Mm.
they could tell like how it felt to play these games and what it means to them. Because it's a very different experience.
Yeah.
If you like today play Ultima 1, like trying to understand what the game was doing, or if you were like let's say 12 years old and your father just got in like an Apple II for his work, and your friends were like playing together. There's a bunch of really unique stories, not only from like um, the time, but also how it was to play those games in those machines. So like one story that I like a lot that I think it tells about the experience is Chris Avalon. He wrote about playing Wasteland 1. And he tells that like when he died, he would like remove the floppy disk from the computer very, very quickly so they couldn't save the file.
Yeah.
And that is something like you don't get on an emulator. You don't get like, let's say, playing the game today is one of those like sheets from the time that you need the perspective from someone who played at the time.
So a whole other topic I wanted to talk about with you was I was curious about which games you would recommend for our viewers based on the fact that they are mostly CRPG enthusiasts, whatever CRPG means. So our viewers already know or have played Fallout, Arcanum, Under Rail, and whatever. So are there like 3 or 4 games that you would like to recommend to this particular audience? And I guess my first question is, was it hard to come up with titles when I asked you that?
No, it's actually very easy. Like, I think we're in a great moment for RPGs right now, for gaming in general, because you have the mega big titles, like you have like Baldur's Gate is coming, Diablo, all these huge titles, but also the indie ones, and like very creative, very interesting indie games. And I think that is like would be my recommendation because when you're like a veteran player, you played a lot of different things. I found out that like usually you have like 2 approaches to this, you know. Either you become like very conservative and you want to play exactly the same game. Like, let's say you really like, let's say, wizardry games. So you want to play like every single wizardry clone, and if deviates a bit from what you like, you're already like, I don't want this. But we have a lot of options in this. Like, let's say, for the people who grew up playing like Baldur's Gate, we now have like Pillars of Eternity Do, which is amazing. We have the Pathfinder games. We're going to get the Warhammer games. Like, it's fantastic. If you grow up with Fallout, you have like the Age of Decadence, you have the Colony ship, you have a bunch of interesting things. Personally, from my point, what I really like is not when people redo the past, like try to do a clone, because that is very difficult. Like, if you're going to make like a Baldur's Gate clone, either it has to be something like really big and really incredible. Like I think Pillars of Eternity 2 and the latest Pathfinder did a great job of this. They are like gigantic games. They're like,
Huge.
okay, this feels like Baldur's Gate 3, let's say, like a natural evolution. Or you do interesting creative things. And that is what I really like to explore. Personally, I like when games combine different ideas and try to do something very different that you don't see in RPGs, either in the old or the new ones. And those are my recommendations. So I have here a small list.
Oh.
My number one recommendation, no, is my number one recommendation this year is a game called Caves of Lore, which I think that like it fits for all the profiles. Like if you like RPGs, play this game because it's like a one-man developer. He did an amazing job. His game doesn't look like any other classic RPGs. You know, it doesn't look like Fallout, Baldur's Gate, any of that. But when you play it, you feel like you're playing one of those classic games. And I think that's like the highest praise you can give. It feels like a game from 1995 that you never played. And I think that that's like really cool. He does an amazing job.
It's a roguelike, right?
No,
No? Okay.
Caves of Lore.
Yeah.
It's it's kind of like it feels like a cross between Fallout and Baldur's Gate, just because I don't have a
Okay.
better comparison. But it's like it's very focused on exploration. It has like really good turn-based combat, and even the lore and the world is very interesting. So that would be like my number one recommendation
Okay,
if
nice.
you want something classic and interesting.
Okay. I think this last title gives us a very good transition to our next topic, which is one of your pet peeves, right? In the recent years, you have been very vocal about how a lot of very good CRPGs are totally unknown in the West because we don't know about them because they're from a different culture. So yeah, why is it such an important topic for you?
What I found out recently is that China and South Korea had gigantic scenes, and this for me is mind blowing. That is something that is not talked about more. Because if you think, let's say, especially in the 90s and the 2000s, it was like America and Japan producing a lot of games, and no other country came even closer. Let's say America was making like 400 games, Japan 500, and you look, let's say, Germany made 12 RPGs in that time. But if you look at China, if you count like China, Taiwan, like the big thing, you count like over 300 RPGs made during that time.
Wow.
300 PC RPGs, original titles. Like, how can you ignore that?
That
How
we
can we not
yeah
talk about this?
that we don't know about at all.
Yeah, Korea is not that big, but Korea has about like 80 RPGs in that time, all PC RPGs that will later inspire, if you talk about MMOs, you're talking about Korea and China, like they're the biggest markets. And all that, a bunch of those developers were making RPGs before. So if you want to understand like that evolution as well, like the biggest games right now, you have to understand the whole history. And especially interesting because the Chinese game, the Korean games, they follow very much the Japanese style. So they feel like JRPGs made for PCs, which like has a few unique flavors. Like they have a bunch of their unique stories, their culture and everything. But the Chinese are completely different. It's like a third genre, like the real
Okay.
CRPG. We have the Western RPGs, the JRPGs, and the Chinese RPGs. And it's really interesting because they have a bigger focus on story than any other game. And this comes from like their past in wuxia novels. Because if you think now, let's be very critical. Like, if you're thinking about RPGs in the 90s, Western RPGs, for example, even if you put like Ultima, Wizardry, and all those, like, let's say up to 1995, the story was absolute garbage. It was like going to the dungeon and kill like the evil wizard. That was what everyone was doing. It was like
Sure.
it was Dungeons and Dragons. Like they were doing
Yeah.
like very basic Dungeons and Dragons stories. You had some exceptions like Ultima 7 and like Betrayal or Condor, but all the rest was very basic. China, they were doing something very interesting because they had the whole wuxia scene of novels, the martial arts, and they began from the start of doing adaptations of the biggest novels into games.
Oh.
So not only RPGs, but also adventure games and platformers, all based on books
Okay.
that follow the entire logic, and a lot of them have like elements of romance and everything. So their stories are much more complex and much more interesting.
But do they
And
do they
this
still hold up today?
they still hold up today. That's
Okay.
that's the thing, because they're based on books that are still hold up today.
Oh yeah.
They're
Okay.
based on books that are like they're still getting remakes and adaptations because they are classics.
Okay.
And there are two like very interesting examples of this. One is a game called Heroes of Jinyong. Jinyong is like, people always say, is kind of like the Tolkien of China. But he made not only Lord of the Rings, he made a bunch of different stories with different characters, all this kind of like very, martial arts kind of thing. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. He made like hundreds of those stories and several important books. Heroes of Jinyong is a book where you are like a gamer that you enter into the computer, and you go into this virtual world made of various novels from him.
Okay.
And you meet the characters from each novel. You have to solve the central conflict of each novel, and then you can choose one side. So let's say, like a comparison for Western knowledge. Let's say you go into the world of Tolkien, and you meet, like, let's say Frodo and Gollum, and you choose if you had Frodo or if you have Gollum, and then you can help Gollum, and Gollum joins your party, and Frodo dies.
Okay.
And then you end this adventure, and you go into another adventure with Gollum in your party.
Okay. Wow.
That's the kind of story that that game did in
Okay.
1995
Wow.
as an open world game, with multiple endings and everything. It's like
So a lot of choice
this
and consequence.
before Fallout, and that is
Yeah.
the thing. They were doing this before us, which is really crazy.